Black Mirror Season 6 is here, and it feels like it really kind of snuck up on us, didn't it? Now, I've had time to watch 2 episodes so far, and I've already made up my mind that I need to talk about episode 3, Beyond the Sea. Why? Because it takes place in the 60s, it has Jesse Pinkman in it, it has vibes that remind me of Tales from the Loop until the final scene. I'm approaching this one a bit differently than my usual style. This is going to be a recap and explanation. It's not my typical deep dive, so I'm not going to go too crazy. I'll try to explain as much of the story as I can, and I'll point out any details that I think are important. So again, it's not my usual deep dive, but those are still coming and none of that has changed. So let's jump straight into things because we've got a lot to cover. Of course, this is a spoiler episode, so just beware of that. And yeah, where are my manners? Welcome to the Nautilus Files. All right, so let's just jump straight into it. So taking place in 1969, Beyond the Seas opens with David. We see him living in what looks like the picture of the upper middle class family of the time. David is drawing pics of his kids, but the daughter protests because she doesn't understand why she needs to be there. David responds by telling her that she needs to be in the picture because it's her brother and it's his birthday. So right off the bat, we're getting the story that David is a family man, and it also means to tell us that he is a smooth talker. In the next scene, the family is out at the movies and we get more indications that David is happily married and he loves spending time with his family. In this same scene, a young couple approach them at the end of the film. They seem to be very much in awe of seeing him and meeting him, and they mention that he looks real. So you know that there's something unusual about David at this point. His wife is annoyed by all of this and it indicates that this is something that probably happens a lot, but David, however, seems to enjoy the attention that he gets. Next, we get Cliff, one of the 3 main characters here. He's chopping wood in what seems like a farm, but he's looking a little uncomfortable while he's doing it. He mentions to the boy that's with him, who is his son, that he still isn't quite used to the body yet. If we didn't know by now the premise, this is a subtle clue that there's something different about his body too. In the next scene, we meet Lana, Cliff's wife. This is when Cliff tells her that their son is wondering about dinner. This is clearly a strange way to put the question. Why not just ask, when is dinner? Lana's reaction hints that she doesn't have a whole lot to do when she responds with, I guess I'll start now, indicating that she might be kind of bored already. Later on, we learn why Cliff asked the question in such a strange way. And this is when we see everyone at the dinner table, but Cliff doesn't have a plate in front of him. Everyone is eating except Cliff, who sits there kind of awkwardly. The point here is that Cliff doesn't eat because he doesn't need to, and it's both cool and weird at the same time. So then we're taken back to David again, and we get a glimpse of the extravagant house that his family lives in. It's also important to note that David's wife notices the van that's sitting out in front of the house, and she thinks that it's suspicious. Later on, we find out that this is the same van that the cultist gang that we run into later, it's their vehicle. And it's funny because the van looks completely innocent, not the choice that I would expect. Anyway, later that day, the writers remind us how much David loves spending time with his wife, and they share this intimate moment while the French classic La Mer is playing in the background, which is, of course, the title of the episode. The contrast between the home lives of these 2 men is put on full display here, and they really couldn't be any more different. The next important scene is when we get our first look at the tech that is involved in this episode that the writers are going to use to explore these characters through, and it's this. Both of these men are part of a program that allows them to have perfect physical synthetic versions of their bodies that they can command and experience life through just like their own bodies, for the most part. This is because they are both on a 6-year-long assignment, and this tech is the only way that they will be able to see their families and maintain their relationships in the interim. Bodies are called replicas, a word that any Black Mirror fan is very familiar with. So upon receiving an alert from their special fancy doodad watches, they both beam up back to the space station. So when they get to the station, David says that there is some damage to the reflective material on some part of the station that Cliff needs to suit up and repair. We get the montage sequence of how getting into the suit works. We see the massive utility belt that even Batman would be jealous of. It's important to note that before suiting up, Cliff has to take certain personal items off of his body, including his dog tag, which looks very unusual. This sequence ends up being important later, so we'll come back to it. But Cliff heads out, repairs the damage, and everything seems good. After the job is done, the 2 men finally get a chance to talk, and David tries to drum up a conversation, but Cliff seems uninterested. He's short with his responses. It appears that he either doesn't like David or just tolerates him, or he just doesn't care to talk much. Maybe that's just the way he is, because he is that way at home. David talks about Bam, particularly about Cliff's wife. He's insinuating that she is probably not happy with living in the boonies because she's a social butterfly, as he put it. Another hint dropped that Lana is bored living in the country because it goes against her gregarious nature, and David's tone is so matter-of-fact that it almost comes off like he's questioning Cliff's choice to live out there. Next, we see Cliff and Lana at home. She suggests that they throw a party, but Cliff looks at her like she's crazy. Lana seems seems desperate to have some interaction with people, but Cliff is not hearing it. Lana tries to sweeten the idea by saying the party is for their son so that he can meet other kids, but Cliff responds with "we'll see," which is how you say no without actually saying no. Things have been very peaceful up until this point, so the writers decide to solve that problem with the next scene. So those occupants of the van that we saw, the cultists, they're now in David's house. They break in the middle of the night. They overtake him, they mutilate him, they torture him, because in their eyes, he is an abomination. Not surprising, humans gonna human, but they don't stop at torturing David. They also gather up the rest of the family to punish them for their wrong lifestyle, all while David has to watch helplessly. So David's entire family has been wiped out, and he is still left up there on the space station by himself. He no longer has a body on Earth to work with. Upon receiving the news, Cliff tries to help him out, so he heads up to the station and tries to talk to an inconsolable David, who screams that he leaves him alone right now. So of course he does. Concerned, Cliff tells Lana that this situation is not only terrible for David, but it also puts his own life in jeopardy. Cliff is concerned that David's deteriorating mind state could put their lives at risk. This makes sense because this duo are the only thing keeping the space station together. If one of them goes down, the whole thing goes to pot. They are not cross-trained and their skill sets are unique to them. This is a major story point because it plays an important role in how things work out in the end, but again, we'll come back to it. Next, we get a shot of David's family in the newspaper, and we can note that it mentions that there will be a funeral. Then we cut to David, who's watching the funeral from a tiny screen that is no doubt a signal being beamed up to him from Earth. David has to watch as his family is laid to rest, but notice that the camera moves over to what looks like Lana, who is also attending the event. The story continues to bring our attention to the disparity between these two men's lives, showing us David eating a fresh packet of space gruel. Yeah, that's what I call it, because it ain't Capri Suns. Anyway, this happens while Cliff prepares to go spearfishing with his son on a sunny afternoon. David's environment helps bring home the point that he is spiraling right now, and Cliff is just going on with his life. The scene where the sun passes over the porthole and shines on David's face for a moment while he's alone on the space station is good symbolism, because it symbolizes that sort of spark or bright thought, but then it turns to a shadow, implying that the thought has dark consequences. So while on Earth with his son, Cliff gets the bat signal and immediately heads up to the space station to see what set off the alarms. Turns out that David was hanging out in the airlock and looks like he's thinking about doing something really stupid, but fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, Cliff shows up at the right time to prevent it. This is too close of a shave for Cliff, and he knows that he has to do something or it will eventually be curtains for them both. Back at the house, Cliff tells Lana about the issue, and she comes up with a plan that could be good for everyone, and that is to let David use Cliff's body temporarily so that he can get off the space station and literally get some fresh air. This is because the replica bodies are not replaceable without the original body. Apparently, our boy David is unavailable for a fitting. Cliff is down with the idea, and when he approaches David with the prospect, David is more than happy to take him up on it. I get the impression that David was genuinely shocked that Cliff would even make this offer, but at the same time deeply appreciative. The two men agree to letting David take control of Cliff's replica, and he beams his consciousness down into Cliff's body. Nice touch showing how David isn't used to the sun being so bright because he's been on that space station for so long. Lana, being the kind-hearted person that she is making his stay her responsibility, and she suggests that they go out to the forest, which is, by the way, one of the best things you can do when you're in the dumps. Go find nature and get reacquainted. It's a little tip from your Uncle Naughty. The time spent in the woods has a profound effect on David. This allows for him to forget, albeit briefly, and enjoy what nature has to offer. We get this caterpillar scene, which I thought was also a nice touch, assuming that they are intentionally likening David to a caterpillar, a symbol of metamorphosis, new life, and change. But moments into it, David comes back to reality and the pain resurfaces in his face. Lana steps in, allowing her compassion for David to motivate her to comfort him in a crucial moment in the story. One thing to notice too is how the son is always watching. I think this is hinting that he knows something is off about this man who looks like his dad but isn't acting like his dad. This kid is always in the cut and he seems to see everything. Back at David's quarters, we watch him pull out some drawing paper. Innocent? Nah. The writers are letting us know that David wants more from this arrangement than painting. He's already starting to covet the house. Cliff takes his body back and comes home to ask Lana about how things went. She mentions that David cried while he was with her, and Cliff is completely taken aback by this. This shouldn't be a surprising thing to learn, so it kind of set off an alarm for me. I took this as him being a little jealous, but pretending he's just curious. He asks her what happened, why was he crying in front of you, and we're getting a little hint that he may be a bit possessive, and maybe that's an additional reason as to why he dragged his wife out to live in the middle of nowhere. Later, David shows Cliff what he was drawing, which is Cliff's house. He claims to have drawn it from memory. So this little tidbit will come up again. David quickly begins to spin this one-time event into a regular thing by telling Cliff that he really needs to get back to painting if he wants to get better, and the only place he can do that is in Cliff's body on Earth. This puts Cliffy boy in a tough spot. Naturally, he doesn't want to give up his time at home but he also knows that David's mental health is essential to his own survival. Rock, meet hard place. So Cliff floats the idea to Lana. She ends up agreeing, even though it will be somewhat of an imposition for her. She agrees to get the art supplies that he needs and set up everything in the barn besides the house. This is where the story begins to get spicy. It starts to feel like a true Black Mirror story. David's real intentions are pretty obvious early on. Everything he does and says seems like it was quality tested in the lab. He notices things about her and is able to deduce certain things about her relationship with Cliff, and he decides he's going to use this information to wear her down and seduce her. That's the things you get. One thing you'll notice is that he uses all the tricks that he uses with his deceased wife, the old French classic on vinyl being one of them. We get some indications that Lana is responding to his presence in a positive way. There are small moments where she gets this look on her face like she's imagining a different life, imagining things being different for her. The shot where she's walking away from the barn and David is measuring his lines is a good one because it's kind of a way of saying that David is laying down the groundwork, the foundation. He's sort of an architect with a plot that involves getting Lana to fall for him. That emphasizes David's duplicitous nature as he shakes hands with Cliff after using his body. Cliffy is none the wiser. Clearly, we're not meant to think that David is a good guy at this point. So this arrangement continues on for some time and we learn that David is drawing pictures of Lana, a clear indication that he has designs on her. David deploys the linseed oil trick. Okay, I'm kidding, it's not a trick, but he comes to the house asking about linseed oil to use as a thinning agent, but Lana doesn't have any, of course. So David convinces Lana to go out on a little field trip. And of course, she's eager to do so because she spends all of her time in this house. So she says yes. And after they get the oil, David takes another detour and suggests that they go look at some books in the bookstore, to which she again agrees because again, she's happy to be out. Say what you want about David. The man has good taste in sci-fi novels. He scoops up a copy of Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, another hook in his bag of tricks. Things aren't as rosy as David would like though, because at the register, the nice old lady reminds him of the tragedy that took his family from him, not knowing that she is actually talking to David. This is followed up by another scene showing how Lana is beginning to care about David, but it's coming from a genuine place. The next key scene is between Lana, David, and Cliff. David is shown drawing Lana while Lana is caressing the spine of the Heinlein novel that he recommended for her to read. Really interesting. I kept wondering if her engagement ring being sort of turned off to the side was meant to mean something here. Maybe, maybe not. There is a slow but steady buildup of scenes that explain how Lana came to the choices that she did. One of those major ones being Cliff's inability to be attentive to her emotional needs. So the kicker, one of the best scenes, is the ending part of when David tries to get close to Lana by showing her how to paint. Ah yes, the old let me show you how to perform this skillful task that you have zero skills at, but I'm going to be rubbing all up on you while we do so. Classic. It starts out with David putting Lana in the painting, which of course makes her feel special, something he knows that she wants to feel. This leads to some risque behavior between the pair. This man is trying to put on the performance of a lifetime, but in the heat of it, Lana snaps out of it. She begins to piece all of it together, realizing that this is what David wanted all along, that this whole time he's been plotting this. She's disgusted by this and she leaves. And then there's a scene where the kid runs into the house and David comes to the house to talk to her. This leads to a very, very powerful scene. This is one of the better scenes in the episode, and in it she reminds David that he is not Cliff, that he's merely using his body. In other words, when I look at you, I see my partner, the person I really love, not you. You're just a puppeteer at this point. Devastating. Things get a little hairy from this point out, so buckle up. Now we're getting into real Black Mirror territory. So when Lana found out David hit Henry, she forced him to leave early. This clues Cliff to the fact that something's up. Why would David leave early? When he asks Lana what happened, Lana tells Cliff that David hit their son. Cliff decides to take sides against the boy, stating that he probably deserved it. He says a few things here that imply that he's a big fan of old-fashioned corporal punishment, and he says that Henry is a handful. This Henry? He's a handful? Is that true, or is Cliff just one of those parents that demands an unreal amount of fear and reverence from their child? Henry is a mouse and it seems like a genuinely cool kid, so I find this hard to believe, but you be the judge. Lana is frustrated because Cliff isn't getting it. He doesn't understand what she's really trying to say here. Being that she's afraid to tell him the full details, it's easy to understand why, given the crazy circumstances that this is happening under, she's afraid to tell him. Cliff would certainly never allow David back if he knew what actually happened, but because he is ignorant to this, David keeps coming back just as they agreed. Only now, Lana leaves the house when David is scheduled to be there, running off with the kid and sitting in the car somewhere away from the house, and they wait until he's gone before they come back home. Meanwhile, back at the station, Cliffy finds himself at a loss for what to do because he's supposed to do one of his cardio sessions, but it's been canceled due to the fact that the equipment is faulty. Cliff uses this time to nose around in David's quarters, and he finds something that makes his blood boil: nudes of his wife drawn by David. So Cliff does the natural thing and calls up his coworker to discuss. Things get heated and Cliff wants answers, but he doesn't get any that he likes. This scene was interesting because of how little self-awareness David seems to have. In the middle of the fireworks, he says something like, "I couldn't help myself, your wife is beautiful," and Cliffy answers with a well-placed right cross. David tries to explain himself, but it falls on deaf ears. Then the mood changes when David starts to accuse Cliff, saying that he doesn't understand his pain. He lost everything he had. Meanwhile, Cliff has everything he lost, and he doesn't appreciate it. David tells Cliff that his wife is lonely, and it's because he neglects her. Not something Cliff wants to hear, but you can tell he knows these are facts. Cliff now feels like he wants to confront Lana. In another intense scene, like the previous one, we get an A+ delivery from Paul and Mara in the barn scene. First, Cliff smashes the painting, showing us how he really feels about David. The two hash things out eventually, but not before Lana gets grilled over the fact that David claims to have drawn from memory. So it stands to reason that if this is true, then he might have seen Lana nude, and if so, this is proof of an affair. Lana convinces him that this is not the case, and in the end, the two are able to find each other, with Cliff apologizing for being too distant and not listening to Lana's pleas for attention. Back at the station, David tries once again to engage in a conversation with Cliff to apologize, but of course that's not all there is to it. The man is a snake. David wants to see Lana again so he can apologize, according to him. He even grabs Cliff by the arm as if to say, "You owe me this and I'm not moving off the subject." This is David continuing to be a bit thick in the head, and this makes Cliff even more upset. Cliff recognizes his game and flat out says no, telling David he will never see Lana again. Cliff tells David that Lana hates him at this point and she thinks he's a snake and a con man. And well, she's not wrong. But this is a devastating way to deliver the message. As we watch the scathing rebuke, we see something break inside of an already fragile David, and we get that ominous sense that something bad is on the horizon. The next key event is the alarm going off again for Cliff. Upon reaching the station, he is told by David that there's some minor damage that needs attending to. So Cliff schleps all the way out to the supposed spot, only to find that there is no problem at all. When Cliff radios David, no response. This is where your stomach drops. Panicked, Cliff tries to get back to the airlock as things are looking grim. We are led to believe that David could kill Cliff here, but the spell is broken when David finally shows up and lets him in, stating that he was using the men's room, and that's the reason why he was late to respond. During the next scene, where Cliff is retrieving his personal items from that trade we'd seen earlier, he remarks that his ID dog tag thingy isn't there. That's when the floor drops out from under us. It becomes apparent that David was using Cliff's body while he was distracted by the fake emergency call. The following scene was extremely tough to watch, even though you really don't see anything but some blood smeared on the walls. Cliff rushes home to see his family, expecting the worst, which is exactly what he gets. David did the unthinkable and took Cliff's family from him. This leads up to the final scene, where Cliff walks into a conference area where David has been waiting. David nods his head as if to say, "See, now you get it. Now you understand how I feel." He kicks out a chair, indicating that the two can now sit together as equals. This is what you would call an open ending, because we don't know what Cliff is going to do next, but the facts show that his choices are limited. Obviously, what David did is monstrous, deplorable, but as we talked about earlier, if Cliff were to hurt or kill David, the mission is doomed and they will both likely die. So Cliff is stuck with David for years. And remember too that Cliff probably cannot go back to his replica because he's been implicated in a heinous crime. What a nightmare. What an episode of Black Mirror. So what do I think of this episode? I thought this was an excellent episode. Like I said, it has a slow burn in the beginning and it builds up nicely. It kind of reminds me of The Entire History of You, which is my absolute favorite Black Mirror episode. But it also, like I said, it has that Tales from the Loop kind of feel to it, which I really like too. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this one an 8 easily. Anyway, that's it for this. This is going to supplement my normal videos, so it'll be in between those and it'll allow me to get more content out to you guys. I will also do some deep dives. I still have a lot of deep dives to do on old episodes, but I'm going to do at least 2 or 3 deep dives on the new episodes. And yeah, so stay tuned if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Be good to others, good to yourself. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.